Other major reforms, the choice of the Secretary General, the process for that can be changed by a simple decision of the General Assembly. It's not a charter procedure that is being followed. It's a series of procedures and steps that are outlined by the General Assembly when they first decided that. They could reclaim control. What I would like to see is one body of the two makes a shortlist and the other then votes on the shortlist. So they both have a role. I don't particularly care which is which. If the Security Council says we will decide the final, you give us a shortlist of 3, that's fine with me, or they want it the other way around as well. But the fact that it's only the Security Council means from day one the Secretary General is looking to reappointment. And this was true of Guterres as well. So they can afford to be a bit bolder in the second term, but not in the first term. And they can afford not just to be a bit bolder, they can afford to ignore the wishes of the General Assembly. Because that's not the body that's going to choose them. So I think that's one example of how we can do things. Another thing on the incremental side, if you like, is also the role of the elected members. And if you want to make a political point, instead of saying permanent members, you can always refer to them as the 5 unelected members. You have 10 elected, and therefore have democratic legitimacy, and 5 unelected. You can increase the number from 10 to a higher number, so that it's proportionately the same reflection of the total General Assembly membership, as was the case back in 1945 or 46, when 45 when the Charter was adopted. Then you'd have more. And you should increase the terms from 2 years to 3 years. I mean, think of most countries that have not been a member for decades. They spend pretty much the first year learning how the system works. And the second year they held as lame duck members, and the big guys ignore them. So you could change that as well, and give them correspondingly bigger roles in the system. Some countries do better, others don't. So there are things that can be done. But as I said, for me the most important thing is the permanent membership. It is so out of line and so open to abuse by all of them that
it's reflected in a lot of our governments too around
Oh, absolutely.
the world. That long-term tenure that is just doesn't change.
I agree.
Glenn Merge from the United Nations Group and Just Peace. How do you reconcile the situation that that the residents, that the people are victims of war, and the politicians are the one that caused the wars, and there should be a legal establishment in UN protocols to say that the general public can no longer be the enemy. In fact, war should be illegal, because if you kill someone in the street, you go to jail for 20 years, but if you kill 300,000, that's a noble event for the country.
War is illegal. Only self-defense is permitted, and only war that is otherwise authorized by the Security Council is legal. The problem is this: by its very nature, the United Nations is a meeting ground for realism and idealism, for realpolitik and what the people want. It says we the peoples, but in fact it's an intergovernmental organization. It's of, by and for governments. And so somehow you have to strike a balance and navigate your way through that. And you don't want to embark on steps that are so bold that you destroy the organization. So then you have to be very careful as to what are your bottom lines that you're not prepared to compromise on. And that's not easy to do, but I don't think in recent times the UN has been very good at that. Let me give you another example from UN history. When Hammarskjöld was Secretary General, and he is generally regarded as the best Secretary General we've had, followed closely by Kofi Annan under different circumstances. The Security Council was in session on some crisis or other, and Hammarskjöld was in attendance and said his piece. And as he left, he was accosted by the British ambassador, Sir something or other Dixon, I think. And the British tried to get him to soften his criticism of their stance on that. And he listened, courteously and said he was not persuaded by the British ambassador, and he would stay to his true to his own position. At which point the ambassador said, "Well, that's your decision, of course, Secretary General, but there is such a thing as political reality." And Hammarskjöld replied, "Yes, there is, but there is also such a thing as integrity." I cannot imagine any of the recent Secretaries General giving that sort of answer. And that includes Kofi, for whom I have a lot of time and admiration and respect. That's how much it has changed for the worse in terms of its independence and integrity. And that affects the whole system. I mean, you know, our press doesn't do us much of a service in Australia by not presenting global viewpoints on certain issues. But did you know that in the George Bush administration, with Dick Cheney as vice president, Cheney sent John Bolton as his undersecretary of arms control at the time, or whatever his position was, to The Hague to talk to the Director General of the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. This is a danger when you know too much and you begin a story and you have to start explaining everything. The Chemical Weapons Convention was set up to oversee the dismantlement of chemical weapons, stockpiles and infrastructure all over the world. The inaugural Director General was a distinguished Brazilian diplomat, Bustani. In 2002, he made the mistake of doing his job by telling Saddam Hussein, "Why don't you sign the Chemical Weapons Convention, invite our inspectors in, and then we can issue the certification that you have no chemical weapons." The last thing the Americans wanted was another UN system to say that they didn't have WMD. So they told him to back off. He wouldn't. They campaigned and lobbied to deny him a second term. They lost that. They then sent Bolton to talk to him in his office at The Hague. This is the Director General of an UN, top level UN body, the OPCW. And Bolton says to him, "You can resign and keep your reputation and keep your aspirations for other jobs,